Scott Staff of the North American Securities Administrators Association. The phrase or warning, buyer beware, has been around for a long time. Why doesn't it work?
Well, what we found in a study we released Monday is that more than 15,000 Americans have lost in excess of $450 million to investment con artists who are preying on the religious faith and trust of people in congregations and churches all over the country. One of the reasons that the old phrase cavity emptor doesn't seem to be applying very well is that the religious faith element involved in an investment scam seems to be particularly effective and seductive. It seems to bring a lot of people along, even relatively sophisticated, well-educated people in mainline, mainstream churches who you would not suspect would be victims of this sort of thing, fall prey. It's really tragic. In a lot of cases we see people who have not been in serious investments before, particularly the elderly, people who take out a second mortgage on their home and have their property jeopardized, that sort of thing, who get sucked right into these kind of deals. And that's really the reason we issued this warning yesterday.
Did it surprise you, the religious nature of this?
Well, we started noticing this about a year ago, as a matter of fact now. And it's interesting that one of the first cases we were looking at was Thomas Root and Sunrise Management, and he's, of course, the pilot who came to national attention when his plane crashed in the Atlantic Ocean on July 13th. It's a relatively new thing. The state of Utah had a major problem in this area in the Mormon Church a few years back, and that was really the first indication we had of con artists specializing in this area. And this is something we call affinity fraud. The affinity fraud, just like those Elvis credit cards and the credit cards for certain football teams, we're finding con artists now more and more are focusing on specific groups of people, getting inside those groups, whether it's a church or a group of lawyers or doctors or school teachers, and getting the members in the group to rip each other off, essentially, help the con artists. You pay off one person in the group who's a major figure, maybe a pastor of a church, and then everyone else is pressing their money on you. You don't even have to go through the sales pitch. And that's, again, one of the reasons why this seems to work so well in a tightly knit community.
Tonight we'll be talking about an investor alert, preying on the faithful. Our guest is Scott Staff, who is Director of Investor Education for the North American Securities Administrators Association, graduated from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and originally from St. Paul. You could start by telling us about the Securities Administrators Association. What exactly is it with the function?
Well, the North American Securities Administrators Association is the national organization of the 50 state securities agencies. And those are the agencies in each state government that are responsible, in a manner somewhat like in the federal government with the Securities and Exchange Commission, for regulating the activities of stockbrokers and other investment promoters, and also investment opportunities. Anything that's sold in a state to an investor has to be registered for sale in the state, and that's actually one good way to detect that a con is going on, that a swindle is going on. If you check with a state agency and find out that the person is not registered, you've got an immediate red flag of a problem.
We'll be taking your calls in just a few moments. The numbers will be listed throughout the show at the bottom of the screen. And again, the 30-day policy, if you've called in within the last month, wait, give someone else a chance to get through. How long did the study take?
We started the study on January or February. We picked out 15 representative states from around the country and ended up finding about $450 million in fraud. That was more than we expected to find. We thought we were a little bit earlier along in the cycle of this particular scam than we found out that we actually were. It's actually building up a head of steam, and we're finding con artists who used to be in other areas sort of piling onto this scam and coming in and all of a sudden introducing a religious element to their approach. And so we're seeing things like people who are using Old Testament prophecy as the basis for drilling for oil in the modern state of Israel. We're seeing people who are using books out of the Old Testament of the Bible and claiming that the description of the Promised Land in the Old Testament of the Bible just happens to match a portion of Idaho where if you dig for gold, you're bound to find it. Or in a little less extreme case, you find people who are con artists who are going in and renting out church basements, or going in and speaking before the athletic organizations or businessmen's organizations of a church or a particular non-denominational group. And it appears that they have the endorsement. Most people will assume in that kind of situation that they have the endorsement of the group or the church, when in fact they may just have paid $50 to rent out a hall. And that goes from there to people assuming, well, if the church says it's okay, it must be a good investment, and that's a classic mistake in this area.
Okay. We have a shot of the investor alert. Can people write in and get a copy of this?
Right. They can contact us at NASAA in Washington at 555 New Jersey Avenue Northwest, Suite 750 in Washington, D.C. at 20001, and we'll be glad to send it to them.
Okay, and we'll have the address up on the bottom of the screen a little bit later. I may have mentioned earlier that this was religious fundraising. This is not religious fundraising exactly, is it?
No, these are the investment swindlers.
It's different.
Who are talking about coins, they're talking about precious metals, they might be talking about stocks, gold mine investments, just about any type of investment. But the common element to all these schemes, no matter what the underlying vehicle for your money is the use of a lot of religious imagery, themes, appeals, endorsements, a group sense to get you behind the investment. That's what's common to all these scams.
Is this in any way tied into the financial problems that we've heard about over the past few years of various television evangelists?
Well, we actually didn't look at that. We looked strictly at the investment question. Those are the folks promising you heavenly rewards. We're kind of concentrating on the people promising earthly rewards.
Okay, we'll promise to get through on some phones here. Let's go to Tampa, Florida. You're on the air.
Yes, you're talking about fraud in this country, and I think one of the biggest factors that attribute to fraud in the country is the way the tax system in this country is set up. We start cheating on our taxes at a very young age. Our kids hear about us cheating on our taxes, and all of a sudden, it's just like a balloon. It starts escalating, escalating, and escalating. Until we get a fair tax system in this country, fraud is going to run rampant, and you can attribute it basically to the unfair tax system in this country. The rich do not pay taxes. Only the middle class pays taxes. Until we get an equal percentage tax base where everybody pays the same in this country, we're going to have fraud because our tax system promotes cheating in this country. That's all I got to say.
Well, one thing I would say is that we see a lot of schemes out there right now in this area with religiously oriented investments and in other areas where the opposition to federal taxation or the concerns about the level of federal taxation are preyed upon by the con artists who basically make the kind of arguments that, you know, the big guys don't pay those kind of taxes. There's no reason why you should get stuck paying those kind of taxes. In fact, there's one of these schemes based in Houston, Texas that set up a group of 5 offshore banks in the British West Indies that were supposedly supposed to get you totally out of the federal tax system so nothing would have to be reported. If you get approached by someone who's offering you either total or partial tax avoidance, that's another good sign that you may not be dealing with someone you want to hand your money over to.
Let's go up to New York City, Staten Island. You're on the air.
Yeah, over the last 6 or 7 months, we've read a lot about Drexel Burnham and how, you know, they were fined $600 million, and now they've got them for tax evasion and all sorts of other things. You know, if you were in a little small brokerage house, they'd have closed you down years ago. But these big guys, just like with taxes, seem to be able to get away with anything. What are the state regulators doing about this? I mean, why aren't they cracking down on this company that's pleaded guilty and paid hundreds of millions in fines, continuing to have its people indicted and convicted? And what are the state regulators doing about them when their fines are bigger than all these other scams put together?
Well, Drexel Burnham Lambert Incorporated and Michael Milken, that particular skein is, in fact, something that state securities regulators are looking at right now. There are a number of states that are reviewing their options about the action that can be taken, and there are some states that are looking at, in fact, at some severe actions. Others are looking at other courses. One thing I would say in this area is that it really is only the state securities regulators who are making a hardcore effort to go after the religious investment swindlers. We've got a fellow in Alabama who's just sentenced to prison for 10 years as a result of the work of the Alabama Securities Commission. We have someone in California who ripped off people for an excess of $6 million and claimed that he had been blessed by God with special business talents for investments. And he's now serving 4 years in a California state prison. So we do make a real effort to put these people behind bars.
Let's go to Seal Beach, California. Go right ahead.
Yeah, hi. I think it was yesterday I saw TV evangelist Pat Robertson, and I just caught the end of his show. He had a segment where he had a man on who allegedly would help Pat Robertson's viewers on where they should place their life savings. You can imagine where that would be. But it was kind of interesting, and I'll paraphrase almost the exact words. He said, well, you know that your estate would end up benefiting a great cause, and we know what that is. But Pat finally ended up, he smiled, and he said, you know, if you leave your estate to your children, he says, it'll probably just get wasted, and then kind of smiled at the camera. And I kind of shook my head and thought of all the retired old people that will smile and say, yeah, Pat's right, Pat's right.
Well, the sort of thing you're talking about, that's one issue, and it's not something we looked at in this study because we didn't look at the activity of any sort of churches per se. We looked at the con artists, and I guess the concern I have about the problem that we looked at is it's one thing to think about where you're going to put your money when you die, but it's another thing when you're 60 or 65 years old to decide what you're going to do with the retirement income that you're going to have to rely on for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You lose that all in one big clip, which can happen in these religiously oriented swindles, and you've got a big problem, which is a lot more serious than where your bequest goes.
Go out to Clarksville, Indiana. Go right ahead. Clarksville, you there?
I'm here.
Yes, go right ahead.
Hello.
Yes, go right ahead. You're on the air.
This is Clarksville, Indiana.
Right.
I would like to ask about Hemsley, who said that only poor people pay taxes. And I'm very offended by that. She has millions of dollars and she didn't pay her taxes.
Right. That's quite a bit off the subject. Do you want to comment on that at all?
That's not really, as I was trying to think of who Hemsley could be, and I just remember seeing the ads in the New York Times Sunday magazine this
trial
week.
in New York City. And
no, that really is a little bit beyond my ken in this area.
That's another case. Let's go up to Chicago. You're next.
Yes, sir. Sorry to bother you. One concern we had was with Pioneer Development. How are they standing this? We came in a little late. We want to be 100% guaranteed and, that we're not getting invested in something that we can't handle.
That's an interesting case that you just mentioned. It is, in fact, one of the 15 major cases that we looked at in the study that we put together. Pioneer Development is promoted out of Houston. There are a number of related companies, 5 offshore banks in the British West Indies. They promise people a number of different things. It's basically an advance fee loan scheme where you put down money and you're promised a certain amount of money down the road. For example, if you want $100,000 for a home loan, you're supposed to put down $5,000 in the front end, wait 6 to 8 months to get your $100,000 check, and then you're charged something like 600 payments, so you get a $100,000 home for $176 a month. Now, it seems to me that if that was, in fact, something that was possible to do, you'd have very little business at any other kind of mortgage company in the United States. It's those kind of promises of real, extreme, even on the face of it, kind of questionable returns on your money that you have to really pause and think about. This particular company is one that has been the subject of cease and desist actions by the state of Minnesota and South Dakota. The company is under investigation in a number of other states, and one thing I'd recommend that you do is contact the Securities Commission for the state that you're in. I think he was calling from Illinois, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Chicago.
You could contact the office of Jim Edgar, the Secretary of State in Chicago, and get information on where that company stands.
Let's go out to Bakersfield, California. You're on C-SPAN.
Hi, I had to call in rebuttal to what the man said about Pat Robertson. That had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with this subject at all that's being discussed today. It was for people that when they died and left their money to their children, that if they wanted to give 10% to the Lord, or if they didn't want to give a dime to him, that they would tell you how to set it up, and we're giving it over a long period of time, drawing interest. It would be more money than one lump sum, and the children couldn't go out like so many people that I could name that are personal friends of mine that have gotten large sums of money and spent it all at once and have nothing to show for it. And that's what they were saying, that maybe if the children get it over a long period of time, maybe they'll do more with it that will give them, I can't put it all together. Maybe they'll have more, I can't talk. Anyway.
Okay, let me just jump in here because it was not our guest that said that, it was a prior caller. So, do you care to comment on it?
No, the one thing, the point I'd make, and it's an easy one to confuse, to muddle in this area, is that giving money to a church, giving money to a religion is one thing, and that's the sort of thing we just heard about a second ago from the caller. What we're really concerned about are the con artists who try to mix oil and water, religion and investments. They don't really go together. It doesn't make a lot of sense that one's related to the other, and that's what you have to be on your guard for. Someone who's trying to give you a hustle on religion in the hopes of keeping your eye off whatever the investment is, and chances are in that case it would be pretty insubstantial, so there's a good reason why he wouldn't want you to focus on that.
Let's go up to Flint, Michigan. You're next.
Yes, sir. I'd like to say I agree with him about the idea of the religious swindling. I want that weeded out. But, you know, the thing is lately, the big thing is the really knock the church over the head for investment purposes. You know, it's a big thing now to hit the church or investments pertaining to a church rather than get the Chicago scandals or the scandals in the stock exchange. You know, I guess it's an easier thing to hit the church rather than go after the big guys. And I really would like them to get the people who are really ripping people off, because it really seems that they're making a blanket statement about, see, that's everybody. Everybody's responsible. Therefore, everybody's guilty of stealing money from old ladies.
Well, it's another point that we were just discussing a moment ago. There is the distinction between giving money to a church and giving money to an investment con artist. But one of the points I think is worth making in this particular context is that we've actually had some very good feedback from church organizations. And I think primarily because the con artist victims that I spoke to who were ripped off by these kind of swindlers frequently end up blaming the church. They don't blame the con artist, and I'm not sure why that is. It may be that they assume that it was because of their faith in the first place that they ended up making the mistake of going along with the swindler. So we actually find that churches are pretty supportive of us trying to clean out the stables, if you will, in this area.
Let's go to Washington State, College Place. You're on the air.
Yeah, I'd like to address two issues.
You're right ahead.
The first one is, I think one of the reasons that you find people are so susceptible to investment con artists is because people don't trust the investment community. So your suggestion then that people call these state securities agencies to find out who indeed would be a reliable source doesn't really serve to reduce the problem, because people are going to have to find, first of all, that the legitimate investment community is trustworthy. And secondly, I'd like to know why you would pursue jail time for the particular con artists involved in the schemes you're talking about, and not pursue jail time for members of the legitimate investment community who have also been found to have defrauded in small investors.
Well, if you think the people in the legitimate investment community aren't serving any jail time, that would come as news to Ivan Boesky and a number of other people who are in federal prison right now for investment schemes. The view I take, though, and you raise an important issue on the question of white-collar crime and how it's treated, particularly in the investment area, is that these kind of crimes, where you rip off an elderly person, take their life savings, someone nearing retirement age, you take a young couple, you take away the money that they were setting aside for their child's college education. And to my way of thinking, that's no different if I were to take a .45 and walk up to you on the street and point it at you and take your wallet, your checkbook, anything else you had on you. This is crime. It's no different from street crime. You can call it white-collar crime, but that's just a pretty way of saying getting mugged, really, in this particular area.
Let's go to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Hi. I wondered if a disproportionate number of these types of scams that you have investigated come out of the state of Texas. And also I had a question. Have you listened to the individual that is on Christian radio about every Saturday morning advocating buying investment coins? And he has about a half-an-hour program and plugs basically his investment coin. I don't know if it's a scam or not.
Well, in the area of Texas, for example, one of the things we were surprised to find in the study of religiously oriented swindles is that it really cuts across all geographic lines, all types of churches. It doesn't make any difference what race you are, what level of education you have, what income level you have. We can find Hispanic churches that have been ripped off this way, members of black churches in urban areas throughout the Bible Belt, mainline Lutheran churches. All those churches have been hit by these sort of swindles. It doesn't seem to make a great deal of difference. Now, the promoter that you're talking about in particular is someone I think I'm familiar with, and I can't comment on that case in particular. However, I would say generally, as a caution, when you get someone who is promoting you an investment on the basis of some kind of religious arguments, that should be reason for you to take pause when you hear that sort of an appeal. You really got to stop and wonder, when you think about what a game of numbers investing is, what that possibly has to do with the articles of faith and all the things that are involved in religion. One of the basic points of this study, one of the conclusions is it's one thing to take religion on faith. Taking investment on faith can be a horrible mistake.
We're just about out of time, but what should folks do if they have a question?
Well, they can contact our office. We can provide them with this particular alert, Preying on the Faithful, which deals with the investment swindles. The other thing I'd encourage people to do is to contact a state securities agency in the state where they live to determine whether the person who's contacted them is in fact registered to do business in the state. If they're not, you've got an immediate sign of some potentially very serious trouble.
Now, all those state agencies, though, basically are under different names, aren't they?
They are. People can contact us at our number in Washington, which is 202-737-0900, and we'll be glad to put them in touch with the right state agency.
Okay, Scott Staff, Director of Investor Education at the North American Securities Administrators Association. Thanks very much for being with us.
Glad to do it.
Thanks very much for your calls, and have a good week. Good night.